What if Esther wasn't just a queen who saved her people, but a hidden force who uncovered a global agenda before it could destroy a generation? This isn't the bedtime version you heard growing up. This is the true story of a woman strategically placed inside a corrupt system who exposed a conspiracy from within and risked everything to do it. No miracles, no prophets, just raw courage, silent prayer, and one explosive moment of revelation that turned a death sentence into deliverance. This isn't just history, it's a prophetic mirror, because the spirit behind Esther's story isn't gone, and neither is her assignment. A crown, a secret, and a hidden war. Every palace hides a truth. Every throne room carries a shadow, and sometimes the person who seems the most powerless is the one God places in the exact position to expose what others fear to even whisper. Esther's story isn't warm or soft. It's strategic, dangerous, and astonishingly relevant, because she didn't just save her people. She uncovered a conspiracy woven through an empire. You've probably heard the polished Sunday school version of Esther's story. The gentle orphan girl who becomes queen, prays, fasts, and bravely approaches the king to save her people. It's a beautiful narrative, but it's also incomplete. Over time, it has been smoothed out, softened, and stripped of its sharp edges. But the real story? It isn't a fairy tale. It's a political thriller. Imagine standing in the center of a global superpower. Persia, the empire of empires, stretching from India to Ethiopia. A kingdom powered by wealth, whispers, and unquestioned authority. A place where a single decree, sealed by the king's ring, could shift the fate of millions. And in that palace, behind golden doors and flawless etiquette, stood a young woman with two names. Esther, her Persian identity, and Hadassah, the Jewish identity she was commanded to hide. That is where the story begins, not with beauty, but with secrecy. Because Esther's ascent wasn't accidental, it was orchestrated, crafted through circumstances she never chose. Her people lived as exiles in a foreign land. She grew up without parents. She had no royal blood, no social standing, and yet God positioned her in a place where information traveled before action, where decrees were drafted in shadows, and where corruption, hidden for years, was about to be revealed. The moment she stepped into the palace, she walked into a world where loyalty was currency and silence was survival. She learned quickly that the crown she wore was more than jewelry. It was an invitation into danger. Every detail of her life became political. What she wore, what she said, what she didn't say. And above all, the secret she carried, her Jewish identity, was a ticking bomb. When we talk about Esther, we often praise her courage. But courage is not the absence of fear. It's the clarity of purpose that pushes you through it. Esther didn't just wake up one day brave. She grew courageous in the quiet, in the hidden, in the ache of not knowing why God had placed her where he did. And then came the revelation that shattered everything. Her cousin Mordecai sent word. A man named Haman, one of the highest officials in the empire, had manipulated the king into signing a genocide decree. Not a threat, not a rumor, a royal, sealed, irreversible law. On a specific day, across 127 provinces, every Jewish man, woman, and child was to be hunted, slaughtered, and erased, legally. This was not an isolated assassination plot. It was coordinated ethnic cleansing at the governmental level. This was systemic. This was global in their known world. This was conspiracy. And Esther was the only one close enough to the throne to do anything about it. Suddenly, her silence was no longer protection. It became participation. The choice before her was unbearable: risk her life by approaching the king uninvited, or live comfortably while her people died. This is where the fairy tale illusions fall apart. Esther wasn't being asked to be brave in theory. She wasn't being coached into a pep talk moment. She was being asked to expose a conspiracy embedded in the highest levels of power, and she had no guarantee of survival. Her decision would require cunning, timing, spiritual clarity, and an understanding that God doesn't place people in position for comfort, but for confrontation. Take a breath right here. What do you do when the very place God calls you feels like the place you most want to escape? What do you do when you realize that being chosen doesn't mean being safe? It means being responsible. What do you do when purpose costs more than you expected? Esther faced those questions long before she ever opened her mouth before the king. The introduction to her story isn't about beauty, romance, or royal favor. It's about identity, secrecy, empire, and the truth that God often places his people right in the heart of the systems they will one day expose. Esther didn't just save Israel. She revealed the dark machinery of evil operating behind the curtains of power. She exposed the hidden intentions of a man who had influence but no conscience. She brought a conspiracy into the light where it could be judged, reversed, and defeated. And in doing so, she teaches us this. Sometimes God puts you in a palace not to enjoy it, but to expose it. Hidden identity carries kingdom weight. In a world where influence often demands conformity, hiding one's heritage may seem safe. But for God's plans, heritage doesn't disqualify, it qualifies. In secret, identity becomes weaponized. And conviction, when acted on, becomes authority. From the moment she was chosen for the king's harem, Esther carried two names, one for the palace, one for the people. On the surface, she was Esther, queen among Persians. Beneath the jewels and royal robes, she remained Hadassah, a Jew living quietly among exiles. That duality could have been her prison, but instead, it became her power. Why? Because identity is more than heritage. It's memory. It's loyalty. It's a calling whispered across generations. When Haman's decree came, ordering the destruction of every Jew in 127 provinces, it threatened not just people, but promises. It threatened a destiny written before court intrigue. It threatened covenant. This truth reveals the first core reality. Hidden identity births divine boldness. Esther didn't walk into the throne room demanding justice. She walked in carrying the weight of her people's past, the memory of suffering, the promise of preservation. That weight gave her courage that had nothing to do with palace status and everything to do with purpose. Her identity wasn't meant to be hidden. It was meant to act, to speak, to save. Many believers today are taught to blur heritage, tone down identity, fit in quietly. But history shows us that when God wants redemption offered across nations, he doesn't send camouflage, he sends clarity. He sends people rooted in legacy, strong enough to risk exposure for truth. The second core theme is influence costs more than privilege, it demands witness. The throne drew Esther in. The scroll's decree pulled her into conflict. The promise of prestige paled before the risk of genocide. Her choice wasn't between comfort and danger, it was between silence and salvation. When she prepared for the fast, she didn't rely on security, she relied on solidarity. She told her people, "Fast, eat nothing for 3 days. I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." Her invitation wasn't indulgence, it was confrontation. And when she revealed her identity before the king and exposed the conspiracy, she didn't ask for personal favor or safety. She demanded justice and survival for her people. That's the posture God asks of believers when evil is legalized, normalized. Not comfortable silence, not private prayers. Public declaration and prophetic action. Because evil thrives in the vacuum of quiet. It diminishes when courage speaks. Pause. Reflect. What heritage do you carry that feels hidden, but might be meant for exposure? When faced with injustice, does your comfort keep you quiet, or does your faith compel you to speak? Because heritage without action is delay, influence without testimony is compromise, and silence when justice is demanded equals complicity. Esther didn't choose the throne for security. She accepted the crown for assignment. She didn't plead for favor. She demanded the end of genocide. She didn't trust the ring on the king's finger. She trusted the promise on God's heart, and that changed history. So if you find yourself in quiet rooms with powerful allies, or behind platforms built on convenience, remember, influence is not about comfort. It's about calling, not about popularity, but purpose. Because when identity is hidden, evil persists. When identity is proclaimed, kingdoms shift. If you were ever tempted to blend in for peace, remember, sometimes peace is just the silence before disaster. And sometimes, God puts you in position not to sit comfortably, but to stand courageously. Masks, thrones, and the hidden name of God. In a kingdom defined by titles and public display, the real power lay in what was hidden, an identity disguised, a decree sealed, and a name left unspoken. These hidden elements would shape the fate of nations. From the very beginning, the story of Esther whispers in shadows. Even her name carries hidden meaning. Esther echoes star, but her Hebrew name, Hadassah, means myrtle, a humble, fragrant shrub growing quietly among larger trees. This dual name, dual identity, Persian queen and Jewish orphan, is the first symbol, the mask that conceals purpose until the moment arrives. It speaks to every believer who feels unseen, folded away, waiting for a moment to matter. God's name is never explicitly written in the entire scroll of Book of Esther, not once. Yet the hand of providence weaves the plot. That very omission becomes a portrait of divine subtlety, the kind of hidden work that rearranges kingdoms without trumpets or fanfare. Here is the first symbolic truth. God often works in the silence between the lines. Just because his name isn't spelled out doesn't mean he's absent. Instead, the narrative forces us to look for his fingerprint in coincidences, forbidden entrances, sleepless kings, and the reversal of decrees no law could undo. Consider the sealed decree issued by Haman, a legal document with irreversible death orders stamped with the king's signet ring dispatched across 127 provinces. That decree symbolized the finality of evil. Once legal authority aligns with hatred, there is no arguing the paperwork. Death becomes lawful. Genocide becomes administrative. Evil doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers from the throne. But then comes the second banquet. The mask comes off. Esther reveals her identity. She names the conspiracy. The king, stunned, enraged, overturns the decree. The villain's gallows becomes his own pit. The death sentence becomes the survival decree. Here we see the second symbolic pattern. What is meant for destruction becomes a tomb for the destroyer, when hidden truth becomes unveiled courage. And perhaps most striking, a reversal of power. The same ring Haman used to seal death is used by Esther and Mordecai to seal protection. The same empire that marched toward genocide turns into deliverance. But this transformation isn't public spectacle. It happens in a throne room, under pressure, with no guarantee of victory. That's the third symbolic truth. The throne, with all its gold and authority, is often the place of ultimate vulnerability. In the eyes of the world, the palace is the pinnacle of safety. But for Esther, it was the trap. The laws were written to protect the powerful and end the powerless. Yet God chose that structure as the venue for justice, not just shelter. In every element of the story, mask, decree, banquet, reversal, lies a lesson for generations of the hidden, the marginalized, and the overlooked. The mask of identity isn't meant to hide you from God. It's meant to position you for purpose. The sealed document is not the final say. Divine destiny can rewrite decrees when truth is spoken. The throne is not always dominion. Sometimes it's battlefield under disguise. Pause for a moment. What mask have you been wearing? What decree against your destiny was signed while you were hidden? What banquet of comfort has kept you silent when your people are hurting? Because sometimes God doesn't remove you from the palace. He reassigns you inside it. Sometimes he doesn't whisper from the desert. He speaks from the court, and revelation doesn't always come in thunder. It comes when a daughter of promise unmasks herself and declares truth in a kingdom of shadows. That's the power of hidden truth revealed. That's the call of Esther. And that call doesn't expire with history. It echoes across time. When hidden identity meets public assignment, how Esther's story applies today. In a world full of social media masks, quiet compromises, and hidden truths, the story of Esther isn't ancient history, it's a blueprint. What she navigated behind palace doors, you may be navigating behind office desks, family pressure, friendships, or internal wounds. This part shows how to bring her courage and clarity into your everyday life. You might not live in a palace, but you live in a network, a system, a culture with its own politics, whispers, unspoken norms, and decrees. The same mechanisms that powered empire-level conspiracies mill around us in subtler ways. Peer pressure, media influence, silent injustice, moral compromise under the guise of normal, and often it's easier to stay hidden, to blend in, to keep your identity quiet, to look safe. But what if God placed you in the system for reason, not to conform, but to confront? What if your job, your relationships, your voice, even when they feel invisible, are lanes through which light can pierce darkness, just like Esther? If you sense a call to speak, to stand, or to serve, start in secrecy. Identity first, awareness next, then action. When Haman's decree went out, the Jews didn't go to war immediately. They fasted, mourned, and sought God. That pause enabled clarity. It shifted the group from fear to faith. It recalibrated identity around covenant, not culture. That pattern still works today. If there is a societal decree already signed against what's true, injustice, prejudice, exploitation, deception, you don't need a viral campaign. You need a covenant call, a quiet fast. A gentle but firm step of bravery before the throne of public opinion. Here's what this might look like now. You sit in that workplace meeting. A casual joke is made, one that demeans someone because of their background. Your identity remembers the scroll. You don't laugh. You don't stay silent. You shift the culture, subtly but firmly. You log onto your feed. You see a post promoting injustice or prejudice. Instead of scrolling on, you share truth. Not with noise, with clarity. Like a banquet hosted in the midst of danger, you speak truth where silence is the norm. You mentor a friend, maybe someone overlooked, dismissed, or marginalized. You remind them that their identity isn't a liability. It's a legacy. That's how you turn hidden identity into public purpose. And for some, the call might be bigger. Leaving comfort zones, relocating to a place of need, starting a ministry no one believes in yet, standing for truth in a divided community. That's the invitation Esther accepted. If I perish, I perish. That doesn't mean rashness, but it does mean readiness. To let your identity shape your influence. To let your conviction override convenience. To choose impact over comfort. Because the world doesn't just need voices. It needs witnesses. Witnesses who don't sanitize the scriptures. Witnesses who don't dress truth up in polite language. Witnesses who carry the weight of justice, even when the throne is silent. The halls are empty, and the risk feels high. If you've ever wanted to hide your past, your heritage, your scars, hear this. Maybe those are the things God will use to awaken what's been sleeping around you. Maybe your most embarrassing identity holds the key to your greatest assignment. You don't need to be loud. You don't need approval. You just need courage. Quiet courage. Steadfast conviction, hidden identity aligned with heavenly purpose. And sometimes, that's the only revolution the world truly needs. When hidden becomes heralded, the curtain has lifted, the mask has fallen, and what was once buried beneath a borrowed name now stands in the open, not ashamed, but appointed. This is the moment when comfort must die and calling must rise in its place. We remember Esther as the woman who saved her people. But that's too small. She did more than save lives. She unveiled the war behind the war. She unmasked a government-level conspiracy designed to erase not just a nation, but a promise. She didn't just stop genocide. She disrupted the machinery that made it legal. And she did it not by shouting from a mountaintop, but by standing with trembling clarity in the king's presence, naming herself, naming the plan, and refusing to disappear. What made her dangerous to the enemy wasn't her beauty or her title. It was her resolve that at the moment of greatest risk, she wouldn't stay hidden anymore. She wouldn't survive at the cost of her people. She wouldn't allow fear to write the end of their story. Let that settle into your soul, because this is not just Esther's moment. This is yours. You were not called to safety. You were not called to silence. You were not placed in this generation, with your story, your scars, your setbacks, just to blend in quietly and make it to the weekend. You were planted, positioned for purpose. Maybe your positioning doesn't look like a palace. Maybe it's a dead-end job, a broken relationship, a stage of invisibility no one celebrates. But remember, so was hers. Before the throne room came the silence. Before the breakthrough came the fasting. Before the victory came the exposure. That's where we miss it. We want Esther's reward without Esther's risk. But calling is always expensive. It costs you comfort. It costs you the illusion of safety. It costs you the luxury of delay. It demands your now. Esther's famous line, "If I perish, I perish," isn't romantic. It's prophetic. It's the line where her survival instinct died and her destiny kicked in. It's the moment she understood. Sometimes your death is the seed for someone else's deliverance. Sometimes your yes is the wrecking ball to someone else's bondage. Ask yourself honestly, what injustice have you tolerated in silence? What truth have you been afraid to name? What identity have you hidden to avoid risk? Because make no mistake, every generation has its own Haman, its own polished evil, its own polite genocide. The targets may shift: truth, identity, children, the marginalized, the gospel itself, but the strategy is the same. Embed lies in law, let silence protect them, and count on God's people to blend in. But not this time. Not with you. Because like Esther, you're waking up to the truth. You were born for this. You were placed where you are, not by accident, but by assignment. And when you step forward, trembling and terrified but convicted, things move. Decrees bend, thrones shake, demonic strategies collapse. You are not powerless. You are not voiceless. You are not a placeholder. You are the disruption. You are the whistleblower to hell's schemes. You are the one God chose, not after the fact, but before it all began. This is yours such a time as this. It might not be glamorous. It might not go viral. But if it's faithful, it will change things. And when you stand, truly stand, you won't be standing alone. Because God doesn't abandon those who reveal what others hide. He backs them. He crowns them. He moves through them. So let the comfort die. Let the silence break. Let the hidden name become the banner you carry with boldness. Because God never forgot who you are, even when you were trying to forget it yourself. Hadassah was always inside Esther. The exile was always more royal than the palace. And you're more dangerous to darkness than you know. So rise, speak, stand, and let history shift around the sound of your revealed name.